All right, I've got Marcelo Calbucci in the Fireside PM podcast. We both were in the Seattle startup environment many years ago when I was a founder back there in like 2012 to 16. And I always found your writings and discussions to be thought provoking. And I'm not surprised that you're now in writing a book and you're still active and leading a lot of important thinking for companies that are doing important things. So welcome to the show, and how are you doing today?
I'm good. Thanks for having me, Tom.
So tell us, first of all, a little bit about your background. Like, I know you've got a great book out around the PRFAQ framework, and I'm excited to kind of dig into that. You weren't born writing that, using that approach. Tell us a little bit about what it was like, in terms of your journey.
Yeah, for sure. I moved to the US to work for Microsoft. I spent 7 years at Microsoft. I had a great experience there. Most of my time there was building Bing, the search engine. Even before it was called Bing, for the old timers, it was called MSN Search in the beginning. Then I decided to leave Microsoft to be a founder, entrepreneur, and I spent 18 years doing that. I founded several startups in Seattle and in London. I spent 3 years in London as well. I work at startup studios. And in a couple of years ago, I joined Amazon to run a new team there. I was always fascinated by Amazon. Like you mentioned, I like writing, I like reading, and I always heard that Amazon had a culture of writing, and I didn't know exactly what it meant, right? You hear stories here and there. And when I joined it, I loved it. I thought it was a very effective way of conveying ideas, of discussions, of keeping track of what we were doing or what we plan to do. And while at Amazon, I was wondering, like, why are not more companies doing this? Right? Why is like there was a culture of PowerPoint and like Jira tickets and like short stories or Slack message to capture all that. So as I was thinking about this, I was like, maybe I should write about the PRFAQ. Because it was a framework that I really enjoy using it. I was fascinated by it. I talk quite a bit on the book of how we use it. And, as soon as I left Amazon, I was like, well, I'm going to do a startup and write a book. Then I realized that writing a book is quite time consuming. So I did the book first. And here we are. We have a book about the PRFAQ framework, the first of its kind.
Yeah, I'm shocked that there hasn't been a book about it already. So thank you for filling in that gap. Why do you think there hasn't been a book written about it? Because it seems like a format and an approach that a lot of tech companies and PMs are embracing and finding a lot of value around. Why do you think nobody's written about it exclusively before?
Yeah, I asked that question several times, and I asked other people about it as well. I think if you look at OKRs, for example, objective and key results, right? They've been used at Google and Intel and other companies for many, many years before even the first book came out, right? I would say one of the first books of OKR probably is like 2016. Or so, and like Google had been using since the 2000s, the early 2000s, or even before that.
Yeah.
So I think PRFAQ is going through a similar journey. More and more people are hearing about it. More people are leaving Amazon and start to using their new roles. So I don't think my book is going to be unique. I think it's probably the first one, but there are going to be more out there.
Now, you mentioned you were on MSN Search. I did some time in Redmond as well, and it was definitely deck heavy, slides heavy. Occasionally, there would be these long, like the Book of Wave 10 or whatever, like these huge, thick documents that we'd write but I don't feel like they were nearly as kind of crisp and concise and precise as what I've seen, when I look at PRFAQs. And I'm wondering, like, Microsoft had some super smart people, clearly able to read and write well. Why do you think they went the approach they did, and why did Amazon take a different tack?
Yeah, I think Amazon is the outlier. I think most companies, when they think about product and business and process, they think PowerPoint first.
Yeah.
Right? They're like, let's create a deck. Let's create a deck with 20, 30, 40 slides explaining what we're doing. And it's not that it's wrong, but it doesn't provoke enough critical thinking, right? So you can like point things on a slide and say like, I don't like that bullet point, or like that number doesn't sound right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But usually you don't have a lot of opportunity to discuss divergent thinking and like different paths and like, is this the right thing to do or not the right thing to do from a strategy point of view? I also think that a lot of companies go tactical too quickly, right? We're going to do this on this date. We're going to launch this feature. We're going to do this thing. And like, they don't spend enough time on the purpose. Like, why are we doing this? What is the viability aspect that makes this an interesting opportunity to pursue versus everything else that we have to do, right? Even for a founder has a million opportunities. Like, why is this the one opportunity they should be pursuing or not? And sometimes they jump right into, this is how it's going to work, right? Here's the feature, but not enough time on that vision strategy discussion.
Yeah, the founder example is an interesting one. Like, I was literally this morning just reading through a ton of pitch decks for, angel investments. And I don't remember a time when a founder has sent me a PRFAQ. Maybe they don't think investors will respond positively to it. But frankly, I think a well-written 3-page PRFAQ or something would be way more helpful to me to really understand the business, because the pitch decks, they feel like you're watching like a commercial. Like, it's all great, everything's amazing, like such a huge market, blah blah blah. And but I haven't seen that in your startup kind of activities. Have you seen founders use it with investors, or mainly is it for internal kind of planning, or like, how does it work for a 0 to 1 environment?
Yeah, so I talk with a bunch of investors and a bunch of founders about this as well. I would say there's a few founders who did write a PRFAQ, right? But at the time of presenting to an investor, they converted into a presentation, a PowerPoint. That is more common. I also heard from a few folks who try to talk with investors and present a PRFAQ. And, sometimes worked, sometimes it didn't work. I do think that there is a re-education component here that might take some time, both for founders to learn how to create one and use it, and for the people on the receiving end to learn how to read it, right? Yeah. So it's not just like, how do you read a regular document? You have a specific lens that you have to put on when reading a PRFAQ to make the most value out of this process.
Yeah, that's a great point around the skill, not just for writing, but for consuming them. I remember in 2016, when I come back to Google and I thought, I want to try this PRFAQ format because I really find that it helps us focus on the customers more.
Yeah.
And I shared it with some colleagues, and it was like I was speaking Greek to them. They're like, why are you writing a press release? Like, that's what our PR team does. And I'm like, no, this is just like a framework to how to think about, what we would say when we launch the thing so that we can kind of focus on the users. But it would require a cultural shift for an organization to adopt it versus like, an individual trying to to bring this into an existing org? Have you seen like best practices, or like how, if a company decides that they want to give it a shot, like what are some of the key things that they should think about aside from saying, hey, go read Marcelo's book? And
Yeah. So I talk about this in the book as well, right? So I divide the book in several parts. One is like, what is the PRFAQ document? What is this thing? What is the structure? Like, how do you write the content and the style so the document is valuable? The goal is to minimize ambiguity, make it very clear, easy for people to understand, not to sell anything. Like, it's not a pitch document, right?
Yes.
It's a debate document. Then I talk about a method, how you go about creating one. And I also talk about how do you use it, right? So a big portion of how you use PRFAQs is what happens in review sessions. So I dedicate a full chapter of the book to explaining to people who are going to participate in a review session. They're not the one writing the PRFAQ, but they're going to be there, like what they should look for and how to think about it. So the cultural transformation is more one of going from PowerPoint to a writing culture. You don't need to do the full transition to enjoy the benefits of a PRFAQ, right? A PRFAQ is just a small slice for strategic discussion. And I think it's the most valuable framework that I know of for strategic and vision conversations.
Is the format typically worked on by a collaborative group of people, or is there usually like the main author and then you have the meeting and everybody weighs in? Because when I've seen like strategy papers at Google, what often happens is the comment section gets blown up and there's like a million comments. And I'm guessing like you would have a similar issue with a PRFAQ, or do you like, how do you engage with other people before like the meeting where people read it quietly and discuss after?
Yeah, so that's what's interesting, right? The goal of the PRFAQ process is not to find the most perfect document or to arrive at the most perfect document. Is the process of creating the document with a bunch of people, right? So there is a main author. There is a person who is holding the pen or the keyboard, if you will, and like committing text to the document, right? But then you're going from revision session to revision session to improve the document. So you might write the first draft, which is very rough, and you sit down with your engineers and you ask the engineers, like, as an engineer, give me feedback on this document, right? Then you sit down with your UX team, and as a UX person, give me feedback on this document. Then you sit down with your legal team. As a counsel, please give me feedback on this document, and you incorporate that feedback to make the strategy better, like slowly refining it. Or sometimes you have to go back and like redo it, right? Because you went through a dead end, and you keep doing that. If you do that well, in about 2 or 3 weeks, what you have is an excellent strategy that you have developed with everyone in your organization, right? Or everyone that should be involved in defining that strategy. So like by the end, what you have is an agreement. You're not having a meeting again to say like, all right, is this the one or not the one, right? Because everyone was part of the process. You're still going to have an approval at the end. Sometimes you have, a VP or an investor who's going to say yes or no, or not now. Sometimes like we have other priorities. But the whole thing has been evolving from meeting to meeting, from meeting to meeting.
Yes. Okay. So in that way, it is similar to some like slide decks that you would prepare with your cross-functional team, in that there's been a lot of iterations before like the big review. Maybe help us understand, Marcelo, what are the big components of a PRFAQ for someone who's never written one but wants to try it? Like, what would be the key things they'd have to include, and what goes in which sections?
Yeah, so a PRFAQ has 3 core sessions, right? So the first one is the press release, which is written as a press release, as if you're launching the product today. But it's not a press release that you're going to send to the press. It's just for internal consumption. In a way, you're painting a vision of like what's going to happen a year from now, or 3 months from now, or 5 years from now, depending on the scope and size of your project, right? Then you have a section that is called the customer FAQ. And those are like answering questions as if how the customer would ask if they read the press release and they want to have more detail, right? So they might ask like, what is the price? Like, what do I need to do to get started? Those are the typical questions. Then you have the bigger section of the PRFAQ that is the internal FAQs. And the internal FAQs is almost like you asking questions to yourself about the viability, the feasibility, the value that you are creating for the organization. So one of the questions might be like, what is the vision and what are we trying to achieve? And then there is a paragraph that answers that. How much do we need, or like what resources do we need to execute this? And there is a paragraph about that. And it might talk about the competition. It might talk about what's available in the market, might talk about the problems the customer has. It definitely talks about the problems that the customer has and the needs that they have right now and how we're going to address it. So those are the 3 sections of PRFAQ.
You know, what I've seen in practice, and it could be because, you know, maybe I was misusing the format, is that I got the most discussion in the last section, the internal FAQ section, and I got the least kind of feedback and discussion in the first section, the press release. I think people just like, I don't know, maybe they just glossed over it, or they thought, well, it's kind of fictitious, whatever. But my sense is like, there's a reason why that was part of the framework, and it's a profound kind of value for the process. Like when you think about that first section, the press release, what problem is that section trying to solve? Like, how is it trying to help the team?
Yeah, for me, I believe the press release, the first section, the goal is to prime all the participants and to anchor them on like, what exactly are we trying to do here? And it works as well as an inspiration aspect of the document, because the other parts of the document might be a little bit more dry. Right. And on the press release, you talk about a customer. Actually, you fake a customer quote to say like, this is the problem that I had, and now I use this product, and this product solved my problem, right? And you make it very believable, so everyone reading go like, oh yeah, that is believable. I believe in this problem. I believe that we can build a solution. So let's talk about the strategy to go about doing that.
Yeah, Marcelo, when you've seen new hires or people, just trying to become more expert at using the format, what are some common mistakes people make? Like, you've been helpful in describing the main sections, and a smart person could probably like run with that. What are some common errors you've seen that separate like a decent PR FAQ from one that's like really having max impact?
Yeah. So I think there is mistakes on the process and mistakes on the content, right? So a common mistake, actually 2 mistakes that people make is, one, they see the PRFAQ as a plan. And PRFAQ is not a plan. A strategy is not a plan. A plan is a plan, right? A plan is tactical. Like, it goes into the details, the features, the process, the tools, everything else. PRFAQ is like vision strategy. That's what you're debating, right? Is this the right vision? Is this the right strategy? Is this strategy viable for the business? Is this strategy feasible from a technology perspective, right? Is this going to create value for the customer? Like, forget how you're going to build it, right? So the PRFAQ doesn't include that. Every once in a while, you might see some elements of that just because it helps the strategic conversation. But like, your customer doesn't care which hosting provider you're using, which cloud provider you're using, or which AI agent technology you're using. Like, they don't care, right? So at a strategy level, most of the time, that's not important. Sometimes it's important because of partnerships and other things. But from a customer perspective, really doesn't matter, right? The second thing that I see as a mistake is like people try to get it perfect, right, before engaging with other people for conversation. And you actually want it to not be perfect on purpose, because you want people to feel like, oh, I can give my opinion about this and I'm not going to hurt, the feelings of the person who wrote the first version, because we are collaborating in creating this document, right? So when people see this as like a masterpiece and like everything is perfect, it yields less conversation, and less debate. So that's not as good.
Your comment about a PRFAQ is not a plan is a plan. Does that suggest that the PRFAQ is most used at the very beginning of a project's inception? Then everybody agrees, maybe the VP approves, okay, green light, go for it. Then a separate document, the plan is written on that. Okay, how are we going to do it? What's going to ship when? Where's the cut line? Is that the evolution, or does it get expanded to the PRFAQ, or how does that work?
You got it. So the PRFAQ is the starting point for a new thing or for a change, right? Maybe you want to sunset a product, maybe you want to change a product, maybe you want to add a process or create a new policy or a program. You start with a PRFAQ, right? And then like everyone agrees on like, yeah, that feels right. That's the right thing for us to do. Now, from the PRFAQ, you might write like product requirement documents. You might write OKRs. You might write user stories. Like everything trickles down from that because now everyone is agreeing which direction we are going to, right? So people are going to be more aligned. The only exception where you would write a PRFAQ after a project has started already is when you feel the team is not aligned and like the direction is not very clear and people are going on different ways to execute on this. You might like want to bring it all together again to realign the team and say like, well, let's write a PRFAQ. Let's make sure we are on the same page about what we're doing, why we're doing, what is the value for the business, what is the value for the customer, right? So that can work as well. But usually you start from a PRFAQ, like first thing. For example, like founders that reach out to me and say like, oh, I have an idea. I tell them like, write a PRFAQ. That's the first thing you should do. Like, don't build anything, like write a PRFAQ and start talking with people, right? Before you start wasting resources or effort or time on something that might not be viable or feasible or interesting for customers, right? And what a PRFAQ does is like it asks you, it's kind of funny to say like this, but the document asks you certain questions that if you're like, oh, I don't know that, I should probably go research, and then you come back and you incorporate that in the document. And sometimes you use other people to help you figure stuff out.
Marcelo, you mentioned that sometimes you'll use it if the team has started to diverge on vision and you want to kind of realign. What's the best way to converge again if there are really warring camps within an org and, Camp A believes that this initiative should be about something and, there's Camp B and C. Do you say, okay, guys, let's have one PRFAQ, I'll write it, and I'm from Camp B, I'm going to make my argument, but then wouldn't Camp A and C just like pollute all the comments to take it in different directions, or is that working as intended and like we just need to storm and work it out?
Usually you want the leader of this project to be the one writing it and deciding, and they need to incorporate the feedback from everyone, right? And when there are like heavy disputes, they need to talk it out and like agree on it. And sometimes often the dispute are tactical, not necessarily strategical. So like as long as we agree that this is the problem that the customer has, and this is how we're going to solve it, like the other stuff, the tactical stuff doesn't need to be, agreed upon on a PRFAQ.
Yeah.
Right? So you can let other people decide those portions of it. But at a minimum, you want to make sure that everyone agrees on the vision and everyone agrees on the strategy, right? Not only agrees, but like collaborate to arrive at a vision and strategy that makes sense and aligns everyone. Every once in a while, you will have disputes, and it's up to the project leader. Sometimes it's the VP, a director, or like a principal product manager to call out and say, like, I heard everyone, but we're going to go with option A, not option B or C. At Amazon, they have the idea of this single-threaded leader, like the person that is responsible for the decisions around a project. So other companies might have something similar to that as well.
Yeah. And, we didn't talk about it, but I'm guessing success metrics and how we measure success is part of the document as well?
Yes, it is. Usually you want to incorporate that in the document. It's a typical FAQ, like how we're going to measure success.
Right.
And you write a few things that are important there. Like you don't write like all the operational metrics and like all the KPIs that you want to track. Like you don't need to have that. But like if it is number of customers, like how many minutes it takes for a customer to go from A to B, right, to solve their problem, like those are the type of metrics that you would include in a PRFAQ.
Well, let's turn the tables a little bit and focus on the people who are either reviewing or making a decision on the PRFAQ. Let's say you are a cross-functional partner of that single-threaded owner. What's sort of like some do's and don'ts on how to respond to that email where, PM Marcelo says, hey, I've got this thing. Can you give me your input as a UX lead? What's the best way to be helpful and constructive, and how do you do it in a way that is best for the team?
Yeah. So usually, best practice is to have a meeting to review a PRFAQ, right? And the person or the persons that you're reviewing with, sit down in a meeting face to face or remote. They read the document, they make notes. And then you as the author go and like lead the discussion, like any questions or comments about the press release section. And then like some people might raise their hand and they move to the next page and like, let's talk about the customer FAQs. Any questions or comments about that? And you're always going to find someone saying like, oh, I read this question, but I didn't understand if it meant this or that. Right. So they're asking clarifying questions, which helps you understand like, oh, I didn't write that clearly enough, or I didn't even consider this as a possibility. So you have to decide like, do we want to go back and like incorporate that thought into the document or not, right? Every once in a while you see people disputing something or a data point, and like you have to go back and like do some research to see if it is true, right? Too many times, and that's what you see a lot on PowerPoint. People hand wave at problems and say like lots of customers can't do X. Like in a PRFAQ, you would never write like that. You would say, 37% of our customers have not downloaded this document yet. And we think it's important, otherwise they can't do this other thing here. So you go find the data, like, and be very precise about that data to have a good conversation about it. Is it worth or not worth it doing?
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. In terms of getting that feedback, I hear you that a lot of it happens in a live discussion. Do you encourage pre-reading and pre-commenting on the doc, or do you prefer, is it better to be like, no, let's talk all of these things through at the meeting?
Yeah, some people prefer to pre-read because they speed that they read, and they don't want to feel the pressure of like, oh, I only have 20 minutes to read this 6 pages in a meeting, and like I'm gonna be nervous about it. So some people feel more comfortable pre-reading. That's totally fine. They make like pre-notes about what they want to discuss. Part of the value of the PRFAQ review is like the riffing that happens between the participants, right? Sometimes it's not necessarily the author defending something. It's someone raising their hand and say like, I don't think this is possible. And the other person say like, oh, no, it is possible. We have done it before. Let me talk about it. So like that back and forth is extremely valuable for everyone participating.
And is that okay to do in the doc itself through asynchronous comments, or is it best in that live meeting?
It can be done in asynchronous comments as well. You just have to be careful with the pitfalls of asynchronous comments. I read about this in the book, right? So asynchronous comments are often influenced by the level of the seniority of a person, right?
Yeah.
So if a person that is more senior leaves a specific comment, it's very unlikely that a junior person would challenge that asynchronously on a document, right? Even on the review meeting, particularly at Amazon, but I also recommend as well, like you should let the most senior people speak last. Right? Or ask them to speak last, because otherwise they bias so much the conversation that it doesn't become very productive. Or a person that had very insightful information is going to be shy about talking about it, right? So that the same thing happens on like comments on a Google Doc.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a great point around the intellectual honesty that you'd get in a meeting. I've been in reviews where I've benefited, where a very senior person at the very start of the meeting will say, yeah, I think this was a great project. I'm really supportive of it. And as the person being, proposing something, you're like, oh, wow, that's amazing. I just got massive air cover. On the other hand, if you really wanted to have a thorough inspection and pressure testing of the idea, that kind of put a kibosh on any dissent, because it's like, the SVP just basically said this is a go. Right. Yeah, that's a good point. And it's something I think sometimes, like as reviewers, we want to be enthusiastic and supportive. So we love those opportunities to say positive things. But if you do it at the beginning, you're kind of losing all your blind spot detection.
Yes. And as an executive on startups and Amazon, like I made that mistake many times, right? Yeah. I got too excited about an idea. Yeah. And then like the team around me was like, well, Marcelo thinks this is great. So like, who are we to challenge this? Right. Yeah. But that's not what you want. That was my mistake, right? Like you have to hold judgment if you are a C-level or VP level executive, or even like a very senior partner or principal product manager or like engineering manager, to like let the other people talk first a little bit.
Yeah. I guess the other benefit to that is you give yourself some option value to learn and reassess your initial opinion at going into the meeting. Whereas if you start the meeting saying like, oh yeah, this is great, and then stuff starts coming up in the middle of the meeting where you're like, oh, wait a minute.
Yes.
It's harder to pivot to start questioning it, because they'll be like, what are you talking about? You started the meeting saying you love this project.
That's right. And the PRFAQ is great because the document itself is meant to evoke conversations, right? It's not, the expectation of a PRFAQ is not like at the end, everyone says like, this is perfect, we love it. That wasn't a useful PRFAQ. Is more like what parts are dangerous, what part are not, what are assumptions, what are true facts. Like you want that conversation to happen so everyone is on the same page. We are not like painting, a fake picture of a blue sky. Like if it is cloudy, we want to talk about the clouds, right? And we want to be prepared for that. So it's very good in that sense, or that type of conversation.
Yeah, I could see that. And then I've heard that the beginning of a PRFAQ meeting is often silent and people are sitting there reading. Part of me feels like, well, why couldn't they read beforehand? But then I know that they won't. Yes. So is that basically the reason? Like you don't want to spend the time catching everyone up. Just take the 20-minute tax, get them to read it there, and then at least you have some level set.
You got it, 100%. It's a tax that you pay to make sure that 3 people in a meeting read it and 3 didn't. That creates a very confusing conversation, because the three that didn't, they're going to start asking questions that are either irrelevant or already answering the document, right? And you're not moving to the meatier discussion that you want to have.
Yeah. Or the three that didn't read it, they may keep their comments to themselves because they just don't know enough. And then after in the hallway start criticizing it. And it's like, oh, we didn't get everybody's input the way we wanted to. Super helpful, Marcelo. Tell me a little bit about the book writing process. Like, it sounded like it was pretty involved. I'm curious, like, what was if you could do it all over again, what would you have done differently in terms of how to be an author of a book?
Yeah, when I started writing the book, I thought that the writing portion was going to be the hardest. The reality is, writing does take some time, takes some effort, but the revisions is what takes the longest, right? Because you do so many revisions of the book. Not only you review your own book and like update things, but your editor review, folks that you reach out to review the book, and they send you feedback, and that takes a long time to incorporate all that back into the book, right? Sometimes you say like, oh, you know what? I'm going to reshuffle chapters. I actually reshuffled a couple of chapters like, a month before the book was done. And that was very chaotic, but it was a very interesting process. And the book is out there. It's available on Amazon, and people can go to www.theprfaq.com. I have resources there. I have example PRFAQs. I have free chapters that people can download. I have a chapter dedicated for people who are going to review PRFAQs, so they can read just that chapter to understand what is their role in reviewing a PRFAQ, and how to provide valuable feedback. And I plan on putting more content out there as well about writing business documents, writing PRFAQs, how to do strategy, product strategy, business strategy, program strategy. All those things are going to be part of the website.
What is the biggest mistake you've seen like executive reviewers make when they're consuming a PRFAQ?
Yeah, I think one of the mistakes is to get excited too quickly. We already talked about this. Sometimes they verbalize it, sometimes they don't verbalize it. The other thing is to be executives at the decision process. Like, they need to be clear if it is a yes, if it is a no, or if they need more data, right? Or more time to decide. What you don't want to is leave a meeting feeling like a decision felt like it was made, but it wasn't. And like, no one knows, like, is it a green light? Should we go or should we not go? I've seen quite a bit of that, honestly, which is like everyone feels excited, but the decision maker didn't say yes, right? Or didn't say like go or execute. So I think that's important.
Yeah. And I think a lot of times, like, newer execs, certainly in my early years as a decision maker, I think sometimes I wouldn't want to like discourage the team too much. And so rather than being really clear about what my concerns were, I would say like, well, let's do another review and we'll dig into some of these follow-up questions, versus me saying, look, I'm most concerned about this specific assumption. Yeah. And I don't feel like I've seen enough to kind of convince me of that. Let's dig into that, because I think maybe earlier in my career, I would be a little bit hesitant to kind of have a conflict with the team. But I think we all learn in the long run, like, it's better to have that stuff up front than kind of string them along.
Yeah, my advice on the book is involve the executives early on. Make them part of the process. So when it gets to their desk for the final approval, for the final meeting of like, let's decide the thing, it's not the first time they're seeing it or hearing about it, right? And the other aspect is a PRFAQ should be a small investment. You're talking about a couple weeks here, right? So the team is not going to feel like, oh, we spent all this years working on this, and like now the executive is challenging us. it feels softer for an executive to say like, this is not the time for us to do that, or we didn't find a viable strategy here.
Yeah. And that underscores your earlier point about decoupling the strategy and the why that it sounds like is really contained in the PRFAQ from the execution plan.
Yes.
So that if you focus on the strategy and the why, they're not going to spend, months building out some detailed plan.
Yeah.
And it's a little bit less high stakes if you're a reviewer to raise issues, because they haven't kind of put all this sunk cost into it. Really helpful. Maybe last thing for you, Marcelo, is tell us a little bit about how the book is structured and how people should consume it. Is it when you need help, you go to the right section? Is it meant to be read front to back? Like, how did you think about how the book as a product would be consumed?
Yeah, I did wrote the book in a linear fashion, right? So people can read it like front to back, but there's several sections of the book that have chapters with very particular checklist of things, right? I use the book all the time. Like I'm writing PRFAQs all the time for my own projects and new ideas that I have. And like I go to the book and it's like, oh, let me see like example FAQs that I could include about this topic, or let me see, a specific thing about writing that is a recommendation that I make on the book, or like words that to avoid and words to use. So like you can reference it as well after you read it.
Love it. And then is there there's no audio version? Is that in the works, or do you think this thing is best read as a text?
Yeah, I'm considering audio version. It's hard to do it as an author. It takes a lot of effort to put an audio version together, and it's quite costly as well. But probably going to have one in 6 months or so.
Did you write a PRFAQ for the book project itself?
I did. I did write a PRFAQ for the book itself. It wasn't a good one, but it helped me understand like what was important for my customer, which are like the founders and product managers that are going to be reading this book, right? So they're the customers. I have a solution for a specific problem that they have, which is like building things without strategy. And so I put the focus on that.
I love it. Maybe last question for you is, I would imagine if people try to translate the PRFAQ format into slides, I feel like we would lose some of the precision and, kind of transparency that you get in prose versus like bullet points on a slide. Is that fair, or have you seen people kind of translate it over into the more common PowerPoint format?
Yeah. So one of the things that PRFAQ does for you as the author or the person creating the PRFAQ is helps you articulate the story much better. So if you think about slides just as a visual aid, right, on the background, but you are the one delivering the story, the PRFAQ is going to help you develop the skills to tell the story of like why you're doing this, what you're doing, like how you're doing it. So there is value there as well to go from a PRFAQ to a slide, right? The problem starts when the slide is the starting point, right? Because then you can't really talk deeply or clearly or concisely about some of the elements there because you haven't developed that articulation yet.
Yeah. No, that order of operations makes a ton of sense. Anything that I didn't ask you, Marcelo, that I should have? This has been a fantastic conversation.
No, I think we cover most of it.
I love it. Well, everybody should check out the book. It's on Amazon, and then you can go to the website for some free resources as well. I'll add them to the description below. And really want to thank you, Marcelo, for taking the time, giving us a little bit of a PRFAQ kind of preview and 101. And people who really want to become masters of it should pick up the book. And I'll certainly be reviewing it with great interest for my own startup activities as well.
Yeah. Thank you, Tom. It was great to talk to you.
Marcelo. Take care, buddy. Bye. All right. So that was Marcelo. Super smart guy. Definitely has great expertise in this area, as you could tell from our conversation. So check out theprfaq.com, and you can also find it on Amazon. And then in terms of other information for the Fireside PM audience, I am still incubating my Tom's List experiment, which has been super fun. It has morphed a little bit from hey, sign up and join this PM community, and I'll make kind of introductions from time to time. Currently, I'm playing around with a Q&A format where everybody on the list can submit a question to me, and then I pick a few questions, promote it back to the whole list, and then people raise their hand if they have interest in it and experience in that, and then I make the intro. So it's kind of like a little bit of Quora, a little bit of LinkedIn mixed together, but really just focus on PMs in the tech industry. The whole premise of it was, hey, not everybody can afford to hire an executive PM coach, but we all have expertise that we can share, and let's help each other out as a PM community. And so it's a nice way to complement consuming podcasts like Fireside PM or Lenny's stuff or all the other great PM content out there, and turn that into like more one-on-one conversations that are centered around a specific problem or question that you're currently tackling. It's also a great way to give back. I think a lot of us remember our early days in the function and not having a lot of formal training or hoping that there was a safe space where you could get mentorship and advice. So go check out tomslist.com. If you want to sign up, it's free. And basically you'll get an email from me every few weeks saying, hey, does anybody have a question? And then a few days later, I'll publish a couple of questions that I picked out. And then you can volunteer to answer them and get an intro to the asker. And it's the questioners are anonymous. So some people were asking pretty sensitive stuff, but really hard questions that they're kind of tackling. And you can do that in kind of a safe environment. So check that out. And then if you want to see any summaries of previous Fireside PM podcast episodes, go to my Substack, firesidepm.substack.com. All right. Hope this was useful to you all. Let me know in the comments if you've had any struggles with the PRFAQ format, or if you have any questions. Maybe we can ask Marcelo to answer some follow-up questions below in the comments. And like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. Let's get back to work.